Hello, everyone. The panel we're going to be discussing right now is boosting your app and how to scale in the world of mass distraction. The entire panel is going to be, as we know, the landscape has changed drastically, and we're going to be talking to our wonderful panelists of different type of strategies, stacks, and tools they use to really make it to the top and really get up there. So first, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our panelists. We'll start with Michelle Webb. She's a senior director of Headway. Then I would like to introduce Lomit Patel. He's the VP of Growth at IMView. Then Oliver Kern, right over here. He's a CMO of PlaySpace. And then, of course, we have William Kriegel from Pixart. I'd like each one of our panelists to please introduce themselves, talk a little about your company and what you do, and we'll start off with a question as well of what specifically you feel has changed in the past few years, which has made the landscape very different in the entire mobile growth space. So we'll start off with Michelle, please.
Okay, sure. So I work for Headway, which is a mobile growth marketing company. And we were recently acquired by a big media giant out of LA called Entravision, so TV and radio. So our products are diversifying a bit right now. But in the US, I oversee our growth more so on performance and on programmatic. And then in other regions, we offer other services. Did you want me to speak about the answer now, or?
Please, a little bit,
okay.
yes.
So, I mean, if we go back, 4 or 5 years ago, we've seen a huge transition from simply getting users trying to rank in the App Store to moving into some level of performance KPI, whether it's an app purchase or something of that nature. And now I'm seeing a big move from majority of our clients, whether or not it's here in the US or abroad, to looking at LTV and much deeper long-tail metrics. And all of the programs are now being oriented towards those goals versus to simply growth.
Hi, everyone. My name's Lomit Patel. I'm VP of Growth at IMView, where I'm responsible for our acquisition, retention, and monetization. For those of you who don't know about IMView, we're like one of the most popular social networking app using avatars. So it's like a virtual reality role-playing game. And we started off in desktop about 14 years ago, but we pivoted into mobile a couple of years ago, which is where a lot of our growth is happening right now. We have over 200 million registered users, and we're now one of the top grossing apps in the social networking category. And to answer the question, just to pivot off what Michelle was saying, generally, a couple of years ago, the focus was all around sort of driving downloads, and now, for us anyway, the focus has really been to optimize towards post-install events. So primarily, our KPIs that we look at for success is really around return on ad spend and cost to acquire that first unit purchase. So we're more focused on optimizing towards those events. We don't really pay that much attention to what the CPIs are, because it's really about paying for what's getting us the right quality.
Hi, my name is Oliver Kern. I'm CMO at PlaySpace. It's a small Spanish studio on the island of Mallorca in Europe. I came all the way here. So we create mobile apps, traditional board games, and social casino apps, and are the #1 in Spain and Italy. I'm not Spanish, but I'm helping to basically move the company from being like a local hero to more of a global player. So that's why I joined about half a year ago. I've worked with many game companies as a consultant over the last few years. A lot has changed. I think my colleagues here on the side already mentioned quite a few things. For me, it's also definitely much more about not the cost of an install anymore at all. It's really, okay, do users behave on a certain I would say, curve of spend as they should, and then it doesn't matter if I pay $10 for an install or $1 for an install. I just need to kind of recoup my spend in a certain period of time, and I have certain benchmarks for each user, and if they behave accordingly, as long as they recoup the money, I'm happy. So yeah, that's what we do.
My name is Wilson Kriegel. I'm the Chief Business Officer of PixArt. What we do is we've come to build the largest destination for people to create content on mobile first. So we enable for people through 3,000 different tools to create different content formats, images, GIF, pictures, drawings, collages, and then they socialize that in our community or on third-party platforms. We have had 500 million users to date. We have 100+ million MAUs. And so we've become one of the top 20 apps in the world outside of China. From my perspective, having worked in multiple industries, I think there's an industry shift that happened across the UA spectrum, where gaming has always been at the forefront of driving, what UA is about, because they are at the forefront of multiple platforms, globalization, monetization. And so depending, I think, where you're coming from, commerce has become very big on mobile for UA. Media is able to do UA now because people do subscription. Gaming has always been very big. So I think there's been changes based on where you are on a vertical basis. I think there's been extremely extensive increasing competition. You've got tens of thousands of more applications out there. And at the same time, you have significantly deeper capabilities and tools than you ever had before in terms of data targeting, tracking, retargeting, and infrastructure on back end on tracking. So I think that's been the biggest shift, is really ultimately the density and the complexity of having to find exposure while having more tools to actually be able to deliver on those.
So everyone discussed that the landscape has changed, that it's no longer about getting your app almost to the top and looking more about the post installs of it. What are some of the biggest challenges you face in analyzing that and finding those quality users, which, like I believe William mentioned, where you almost don't care if it's going to be $10 an install, you care if you're going to make that money back, right? So in order to go ahead and do that, you need to actually find those quality users. So, I'd like to hear from our panelists of how you go about finding those quality users and analyzing that data.
I mean, again, because we work with a lot of different clients from different verticals, countries, et cetera, the strategies are markedly different from region to region. But I would say here in the US, we're finding that not only is it becoming more complicated to find them, the marketers are becoming a lot more selective and intelligent in how they go about it. So we're leveraging data in ways now to find audiences programmatically, to do lookalike targeting and other types of very smart marketing versus kind of spray and pray, which is what it was a few years ago. It was mass scale, but without necessarily knowing who you were getting or why. And so there's a shift in dollars and how people buy now, where people may have been more risk adverse to buy on a CPM or to buy programmatically. We're seeing the appetites increase, and that paying an extra $1 or $2 CPM on top of just the raw acquisition cost is a lot easier to swallow if you're buying really quality audiences from a DMP.
So for us, I think the place to really start is sort of look at your first party data, the data that you actually have, and fortunately we have quite a lot of data on our users. So we're able to, figure out in terms of lifetime value who our best users are, and then we use that to really build different types of audiences and lookalike audiences that Michelle had mentioned, that we go back to different partners like Facebook and Google and programmatically as well, and feed the right data in there to sort of build those audiences. That's one way to go. The other thing too, in terms of how we approach, it's creative as well. Coming up with really relevant creative for different audiences and trying to get more granular at a creative level. For us, the easiest way to go is really try to have like a generic evergreen creative, but that isn't necessarily the best way to go. And so what we've found by coming up with relevant creative for different audiences that we're going after on different platforms works really well. Another piece to that is, that's one part. That's another part too. Bringing people in top of the funnel. But then you got to think about your funnel as well. Like once you get people in, what kind of onboarding experience do you want to focus on? Because that's another way to get a competitive advantage. Because if you can convert more of those people that are installing your app into taking those post-install events that you want, enables you to get more aggressive on the front end on how much you can pay to bring those users in. So, kind of looking at a holistic view of the entire user journey, I think is a good way to go. And then another piece to add to that is retargeting, re-engagement too, because one of the things you'll find is, most people that install your app, generally aren't going to really stick around. But what people don't realize is within the first 7 days, about 70% of your users are dormant, which means that they're just exploring your app versus other apps that they might have downloaded. So, knowing where somebody is in the life cycle within the first 7 days and coming up with good re-engagement, retargeting messages for push and app and retargeting ads to try and nudge them along has been really effective for us as well.
So you were asking where to start. For me, it has always been across all the apps that I've been involved in, all games, admittedly. The first starting point was definitely always Facebook for us, because there, at least in terms of targeting, you had some nice capabilities. You have an obvious understanding of kind of what is your user like. So I do try to kind of build really personas of the users that I think are the right ones for the app, and then also try to identify like their motivations, and accordingly, as Lomit was saying, really also provide creatives for that exactly, and then start going after them and carefully understanding like, okay, how do these users behave before you kind of try to really scale that out, right? But that's definitely, for me at least, has always been like the starting point in like a soft launch to get a better understanding of like, okay, what are these audiences? How do they then behave in the app? Do they meet kind of the KPIs that I expect for the product? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Again, if we go back to if you're a commerce app or if you're a gaming app or if you're a video live streaming app, I think your strategy is going to be completely different in terms of why you're spending and where you spend. And so I think the user stories and the personas are really important. Fundamentally, you have to invest in your platform internally to understanding your data lifecycle of a user itself to then be able to spend money intelligently. But depending on what it is that you're trying to accomplish, whether it's just maintaining exposure in an app store or surging, or you're testing for a particular revenue channel, or you're trying to amplify K-factor, and so you're trying to create velocity in your product, so you're overspending at whatever cost to then be able to have density, then creates more K-factor, which lowers your cost over time, and then increases your revenues. Like, I think it's contingent really on what it is that you are as a product. If you're a global product, if you're a U.S. only, your strategy in China is going to be very different than it will be in the U.S. But fundamentally, ultimately, against what your user persona is, your story, if you're doing it for ARPU and optimizing for that, like you have to A/B test a fair amount, and you have to have the right partners in place for tracking and for analytics behind that. Yeah. And ultimately, I think growth, if that's what we're talking about, goes way beyond UA, because UA is really just direct marketing. I know we love to say UA growth, but really that's just one small piece of what growth really is, which then stems to your growth data team, which is about your analytics and optimizing for time spent and onboarding and other parts of your product, which will create greater yield of spend. But the search, like when Apple came out with its search, paid stuff, it was tremendous. Like if you could create some kind of virality there in that environment, you could have really like 20 cents. I think we tested that for a little bit. It was like 20 cents a US user acquisition, keyword search on Apple. So I think beyond the Facebook where you have great targeting, there's a lot of different channels, whether it's you're testing Instagrams or influencers, bloggers, ASO optimization. There's just a lot of different ways of spending money and time. And to the other point, which is lifecycle marketing, which is a huge expense. is a marketing expense for growth. Whether you're using Braze, AdBoy, or somebody else, like re-engagement mechanisms around retention drives virality and growth. So whether you're spending money on your retargeting and your emails, you're spending capital or money in some way, shape, or form to retain users and to drive more growth behind that. It goes way beyond the UA component.
Great topics.
Do you mind if I just add one more thing
Please.
to that? So kind of back to these initiatives changing spending patterns. I also think this has shifted attribution a lot. And if you want to know where someone came from, because where they came from matters on the back end on how much they use your app, what they spend, all that, you need to know where they first encountered your ad. And so we're seeing a big shift to that end with multi-touch attribution and people being a lot more flexible with having a VTA plus CTA model and a move away from 7-day CTA only, et cetera. And in some other countries, it's still very tough and it's a big uphill battle to say, hey, can we at least have 6 hours viewed through attribution or some minimal amount to give more depth and texture to how we A/B test and whatnot. And the argument still stands. Like, well, if you are much lower in the funnel, you have no idea where these people came from, then you can't do all this other cool stuff we're talking about because you really are you're too low on the funnel. So anyway, it's a really cool shift for me on my side to see so many people kind of realizing what has been true for a long time in branding is now ringing true for performance as well.
So we touched upon some interesting topics about UA, that it's not just about just getting that install, but actually possibly retargeting it and getting back the user and so forth. So can any of you share some of your experiences with testing some of those strategies, and the more specific you could be, the better, okay? And how you actually go ahead, track the performance to scale that growth even further. So it's almost like a two-part question. Just to rephrase it, what specific strategies do you use to go ahead and test the UA and the post installs, and what performance tools you use to go ahead and track that?
I'll let you do next.
Sure. So, let me just use Google UAC as an example, just to get a little bit more specific. That's become one of our biggest UA channels. And the way we went about it was there were basically 3 steps to it. Because for those of you who are using Google UAC, know that, it's become a bit of a black box, so there's a little bit less transparency into what happens with the magic. However, what we wanted to figure out was how could we potentially growth hack to have some kind of influence in terms of what levers we could pull to at least stack the deck in our favor. And so for us, first of all, starting with the goals, so we measure success looking at cost to acquire a payer and the return on ad spend. And so on Google, you can basically set kind of the optimization goals in terms of what you want the system to optimize towards. And it could be an install, a registration, or whatever post-install events. And we tested a slew of those because we just wanted to make sure that we were going to pick the right one. And we ended up going with purchase because obviously that made a lot of sense for us. So, testing and figuring out the right goal is really important. And once you find a goal, you want to really stick to that goal. So then Google really knows exactly to hone in on that target. The second part of that is how do you help Google to really accelerate those learnings? So the other levers that you have is kind of the bids that you can pay and the budget. And, generally, on Google UAC, ideally you want to get like 30 to 40 purchase events, or at least that's what it was for us, a day for a consecutive period of time before the system can get pretty smart around hitting our optimized goals. And so, we had a choice as a company. Do we want to take the slow road to doing this or the fast road? And we chose the fast road because we don't mind losing money in the short term to really figure out if this channel has potential to scale quickly for us. So what we did is, whatever our ideal CPA was, we ended up going above that, like 2x. and we're willing to run at a loss for a couple of weeks just to make sure, we gave the system enough goals and data to really see if Google was kind of bluffing or if it could really do what it could do. And fortunately, after 2 weeks, we started seeing the trend turn, and we were able to kind of turn that into hitting our ideal goal by about week 4. And the third and most important piece on Google is that it gives you the ability to put a lot of different creative placements in there, and they want to try to figure out, what's the right creative that's going to work. For us, even though it was a headache, we actually did come up and take advantage of all the creative formats that we could potentially put in there, because then we could really identify what was the creative formats that could work for us. And as an example, what we found was video performed better for us, but more importantly, within video, we used to do a lot of landscape video before, but on Google UAC, portrait video, because of their placement through AdMob, opened up a lot of inventory that we wouldn't necessarily have been able to identify if we didn't really convert a lot of our videos into portrait. And maybe this might not be true now because a lot of you guys are hearing this, but it was pretty cheap to get access to portrait videos, and so we were able to get a lot of scale just by converting a lot of our videos into portrait on Google UAC.
Well, I'll speak to this from different perspectives. So we're a content creation platform. We tend to try to look at things in how our users use our platform to create and share content, and how that ties into market trends and social interest. And we capture every single hashtag, and we have AI recognition of images. So our database allows us to understand within our platform what's trending as what people are creating. So when the Avengers movie came out, and at the end of the movie, Spider-Man's like, oh, I don't feel so good, and he's sprinkling away. There was a few blogger influencers who started using one of our edit tools to recreate that kind of effect that was shown in the movie as they're kind of disintegrating, and posting that, and we realized that there was demand around that in the app, as well as sharing taking place, particularly in China at that moment. And I think at that time we were ranked around 35th or 40th in China, in the maybe 20th or something in the photo video category, and then maybe 70th in the overall app stores. And we saw the trend taking place in our app as we looked at our database of what was trending in the creative process, as well as what people were starting to share, because we could track the hashtag. I'm not feeling so well. Hashtag I'm not feeling so well. And so what we did is then we targeted the market. We saw the content. We saw the proliferation of the content. We saw the social relevance of the content and how that tied to using our product specifically. And we went into the market and found different channels to re-expose people within platforms like Weibo or Tencent, where people were sharing that content and talking about that content, or wanting to know where that content was made, to then create a much more viral, organic, lower cost of acquisition, higher demand experience around why use our product, where that content was created, and targeting influencers or channels of content specifically through the market in much lower cost. Not just about acquisition as much as about exposure of a trending social topic that everybody wants to participate in. And we went to become the second most downloaded photo video app in China at that moment, in the top 20 across all stores within several weeks, and going from about 200,000 installs a day to 1 million a day, without really actually spending pure UA dollars, as much as looking at how our product was being used and showcasing the use case in a market where there's a tremendous amount of social relevance around the content itself, and that amplified the K factor. And so we went back to what our users do, which is create content. And I think in general, there's many ways of trying to get your app to market, and many of them can simply be, what is a use case specifically towards a certain demographic or in a certain channel that people will resonate more, and you A/B test that. Like when we have a new tool or a new creative capability, we'll A/B test the creative assets that we're using across different channels to see if people can directly onboard to that use case, and whether the retention factor is much greater when they directly use that particular new edit tool, whether it's like a beauty tool or something else. We target a female audience, and it's prom, and so there's a way, I think, also within individual products to be able to A/B test against a particular use case versus the actual whole product, and then optimize for onboarding of the interested party.
William, anything?
Yeah, I can also add to that. I think for games, the ones that stick around are the ones that actually really also, in a similar way, are around the content that is actually, or the community that is actually grouping around this application. And those are the ones that are successful, the ones that kind of stick around, and we also really try to kind of keep the app alive and do a lot of events actually, and that's again also something where we kind of use that for some of our remarketing efforts, for some of our efforts to kind of re-engage with users, lapsed users, with the existing audience, to kind of keep them active and keep them in the games. So for games, that's easy if you really treat it more like a live service, and kind of build content around that, for sure.
Yeah, and I'll add just an anecdote about some things that I see that are done really well, particularly with international expansion in gaming, for example. When someone goes to LATAM, we were just talking about this actually before the panel, they can make a really big mistake with doing just a general Spanish translation for all Latin American countries for games and use the same image in every country. And call it Amerocentric mistakes in a lot of cases, but there's actually like very big cultural differences country to country, language to language. Like the Spanish in Mexico is not the same Spanish in Argentina, for example, and Brazilians don't want to have anything to do with Argentinians, for example. So these are like real cultural things that happen, and so when a marketer goes to these different regions, it's really important to culturalize the creatives, not just localize in the language. And so when I've seen folks do that and do that well, the impact is huge, and they are much more successful, much faster when they take all those things into consideration. And I really think the only way to do that well is to find people who live in those countries, who are natives, to help you. So either help you directly with your user acquisition and your creative, or a combination of the whole.
Let's switch a little bit to a little bit more detailed information about KPIs, right? What KPIs would we look at to see if your efforts are actually working? Okay, especially since earlier on in the panel we discussed that it's not so much about the installs, it's really about if there's an ROI and so forth. So what are the KPIs you're going to go and look at each individually, and what tools, if you could really be specific, analytic tools you'll use to analyze if those KPIs work, and linking them back to those actually UA efforts, including the post retargeting efforts?
So again, because we're a vendor and we don't own our own app, I see kind of a variety of things. But generally, people are using more than one tool now, whereas, maybe even just a year ago, it was like they just had their MMP and whatever their back office was. And now you're seeing folks layer on top a Singular or a Tengen or some other analytics partner, and in some cases, an additional layer. And then a guy I was talking to yesterday, he's got a super cool game. They actually do their own SQL queries on their own backend database and upload into Tableau, and are connecting data in different ways than I've seen, in prior years. So if that's not too vague, again, because I can't go super specific about other people's products, but I just think it's getting much smarter, and it's going beyond just a KPI. It's looping all of that data between front office and the intermediaries, and then the back office data.
So for us, as I mentioned, the main KPIs we look at is cost to acquire a payer and return on ad spend. And so in terms of how we track that, there's a couple of different tools, but starting off with, we use AppsFlyer for attribution and campaign management on all the mobile campaigns. We also have a pretty robust data warehouse on the back end, and we use Tableau. So all of the data that comes from AppsFlyer ends up going into our back end database, and that's where we sort of take a more holistic view on users around their retention and lifetime value, and pretty much kind of look at their retention curves and how much we can monetize those users for. Because there's two ways we actually monetize users. One is through in-app revenue, and the other one is advertising. So AppsFlyer wouldn't know how much ad revenue we're getting, so we need to put everything on the back end. And there's another thing that we've sort of built in-house, which is more of a user value prediction model. So based on different behavioral actions that somebody takes within like day 1, day 7, we can basically project out exactly, pretty close to, how they're going to behave at day 30, day 60, and beyond that.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate for return on ad spend, and that depends very, very much on the app. So I'm involved in a few companies on like advisory level. With PlaySpace, it's very simple. We have like 180-day return on ad spend that we look at, and we know already on day 1 and day 3 if that's going to kind of back out or not, because the app has been around for quite a while. So we can monitor that, and we want to kind of see that already very, very early on, if this is going to work out or not. And yeah, I'm a big fan of that. And tools like Tenjin, as you mentioned, or Singular, they kind of allow you to very quickly also see that, and that's kind of key at the end of the day, because then you're not forced to just look at kind of CPIs and hope for the best, or have like a group of people just copy pasting data into Excel spreadsheets.
So we generate revenues through advertising and primarily also subscription. We ended up replicating something that Facebook did, which they had a formula around how they quantified the lifetime value of a user and thus which KPI they needed to move, and which is why Facebook has bought companies based on time spent, because time spent is their primary criteria in their formula, and that's why they bought WhatsApp and Instagram and other people along the way. And so we removed the time spent, and it was edit per DAU. So we have a formula that's really about, of course we care about the health of our community, and so MAU, over DAU, and MAU per month, DAUs, time spent. But we also look in our monetary formula over time, and how we scale our revenues over time is, DAU, edit per DAU, ARPU per edit per DAU. And so we have this formulaic way of looking at, okay, if we're going to do anything, whether it's spending on CRM, wherever that may be, or however we're moving the needle, they all have to translate back to that formula, because ultimately that's how we know we get to $50 or $100 million revenue, is because we understand each components of that, and ultimately we're trying to drive the creator component of our platform, which is more content per user. More content per users is more growth, is more virality, and it's ultimately more revenues per those users. And so we work, we have a 30 people growth data analytics team, so we're probably not necessarily like most common companies, but whether it's Google or Facebook, whether you're using App Annie or Sensor Tower or Branch or AppsFlyer, there's a lot of companies that you have to work with to ultimately get all these pieces and components. And so, data analytics is ultimately an important piece of the puzzle to all of this. At the core of any great successful UA is a great successful product, which then is derived off of having the fundamentals right in your product around retention and re-engagement or lifetime value, time spent, like whatever it is that you measure that is a successful product. You can't, I remember when we did draw something at OMG Pop, and we had done 30 games before that, and we were doing a $10 million P&L for like 2 years. And they were flash cash, but we had the fundamentals around how we made money well, and then we had Draw Something, which became, before Pokemon Go, the biggest mobile game ever, and then we did a $100 million P&L on the same business model, but because the game is a hit. When the game's a hit, money flows, right? As long as you have your fundamentals right and your game's a great product, you're gonna make a ton of money, as long as you have the fundamentals. And the fundamentals is about engagement, retention, and core product KPIs before you go about running around spending money on UA.
Wonderful.
I was just going to say, I think that you made a really good point about, your product and knowing your product and sort of where it's at and its greatness, right, is really important with also how you pick which KPIs to not only measure your campaigns by, but also how you're going to hold others against those KPIs. You know, a couple pitfalls I see sometimes is, you know, maybe the product's not that great. And so having a KPI on 7-day retention shouldn't be in the mix at the beginning. You know, it should be probably something earlier on, because when I played it, you know, day one, I was lost, you know. So I try to get involved in whatever way I can to experience the user, so that when I'm consulting with people, I can also say, hey, let's take another look. And I'm not going to say they have a bad product, but I'll say maybe you guys should work a little bit more on these next steps with your users before you've formulate an entire program around an erroneous KPI.
I mean, at the end of the day, no amount of money spent will make for a great product, because the great product is what derives the purpose of spending money.
Always start with a great product.
But if you're a developer, you always think like, okay, I don't know anything about marketing, but maybe this is the silver bullet that will kind of rescue everything. Unfortunately, that's never going to happen.
Always got to start with a great product and then do marketing. That's for sure. So let's talk a little bit about outside of the traditional UA channels. What other, let's go ahead and call them organic or viral growth methods and strategies we can use to drive the traffic? You know, such examples, just to give a head start, like influencer marketing or TV or radio ads or anything else. And then on top of that, how could you even track something like that as well? That becomes much more difficult to track. So we'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, so interesting transition for us, being primarily digital and mobile and then being acquired by a radio and TV company. We now have a lot of opportunities to talk to folks about these old new ways of marketing. And I don't think there's any perfect way to track it yet, but some of the tools that I've seen work well is either initiating a coupon code or some other type of unique identifier for a radio release, or perhaps some type of a festival. There are ways to still track some level of performance, although it won't be perfect because not all people will actually punch in the code that you tell them to. They may just go directly to the App Store and there you go. So there's got to be some way that you're analyzing the time at which these activities are taking place. And when you're booking a lot of offline media, you're buying it by blocks of time. So it's a little easier to say, yes, we knew that this unit ran between X time and X time. And so can we see from a baseline what the lift was in the App Store for that particular location? Because you got to be geo-specific in a lot of cases for that too. And then on the influencer side, kind of similarly, we're seeing people have success with again, having some kind of unique tracking code or way to monitor the lift in the App Store during the influencer ad.
You want to go?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, we do TV in Spain, and we see some really good results there. We do kind of measure the time after we show an ad, like the 15 minutes after. That's kind of what we attribute. But obviously, we still don't know which one of these users above our baseline are kind of the ones that come from TV and not. So it's hard to kind of assess then the real LTV of the users. But what we've also seen, which is really, really interesting, is TV gives the app credibility, right? So we see actually during times when we run TV campaigns, we see a higher conversion rate from free to purchase. So that's really quite interesting, and that's obviously something that you can also kind of measure. On top of that, and that's kind of an old thing, was in the online space already around. When you run TV, also your acquisition costs usually go down because there is brand value then in that TV. Yeah.
So I'm going to use a different example because I agree with these examples. But so one of the things that we've done actually that works really well to drive organic growth, it's actually using Apple search ads. So what we do in Apple search ads is we try to identify relevant keywords that are non-branded outside of competitor keywords or MView related keywords that and see how they perform. And once we identify a set of keywords that work well, the first thing we do is we actually optimize our US App Store with those keywords from the metadata, the keywords, the app screens, and sort of figure out, is it, how well that's doing. And once we've figured out and proven, when we look at, the baseline and the lift by optimizing around these keywords, because as you'd mentioned, the big challenge is really figuring out data, right? So getting data through things like, App Annie and stuff, it's pretty easy, right? You can tell how well you're doing around keywords and through Apple Search. Then once we've done that, we kind of take the next step to what Michelle was saying, which is really around, what we did before, and I wouldn't recommend this, is just kind of, a Google translation and try to take that and use that same stuff for all of the other territories and geographies. What we've done is something better now. So, we find people in each of those countries to actually culturalize what's working in the US and try to do that for all the different territories that are available on the App Store or Google Play. And what we've found now is that we get over 20% organic growth coming from territories and countries where our app isn't even localized. And the benefit is that these people are actually coming to our app and they're actually spending money. And so a good example of that is China has become a really good market for us. Even though we have so much friction, we make it super hard for people from China to come to our app because we have a Facebook login. They need to go around a VPN. But going back to the fact that, people there seem to really love the fact that they can create an avatar and then go and share it with their friends. So even though, we don't get the same lifetime value, we do get enough of that one-time hit where, just making some of these simple changes around ASO, where, we're driving, a lot of revenue coming from countries where we're not even localized.
So we're full disclosure, the 500 million users we haven't actually done any UA for. So probably shouldn't be on this panel per se, but it's all organic for us primarily. But we do a lot of things on the organic side to drive, whether it's ASO and other areas, to drive a lot of growth. We get over 10 million installs per month, right? So, and that's primarily derived off of catering to our users. We actually spend a lot of time with what we consider our VIPs or our creators, influencers, and finding ways to kind of amplify the discovery so they have more followers and how they expose us on other platforms. 40% of our discovery is through search on the Google Play Store or Apple. 40% is word of mouth. Right, so we were always an open network versus closed like Snapchat was early on, or Instagram. And what we've done today is work with we work with over 30 or 40 branded content partners, the same way Giphy has in the past. And they actually give us access to their IP. And so what we do, whether it's Fear Factor or The Walking Dead or Jared Leto and his band, we work with all sorts of companies, all sorts of brand owners, and they then leverage our platform as marketing interactive channels to have access to influencers and creators to proliferate content around their brand. And then they promote that on their channels. And so they have millions and millions and millions of followers on various channels in which they include the hashtag for the challenge to participate in, the deep links, the celebrity will tweet about it. And so we create campaigns, if you will, in a way where we leverage the creators. We expose creators to more kind of followers potentially, and they have access to premium branded content for free to create with. And we create kind of these viral, organic, campaigns that then become highly PR-centric experiences for their company, our company, and drive huge surges. And ultimately, if you're tracking your analytics, it's really easy to be able to correlate, not 1 percentile. I mean, if you're focused on 1 percentile, like your app is probably like, if you're at Facebook, 1% is a big deal. If you're at a 20,000 MAU app and you're looking at 1 percentile, like you've done nothing, right? So when you're a small app, you have to look at 50, 100% moves, right? When you're at Facebook, you're looking at 0.5% a quarter. And so it's easy to see the correlation both in the content because of deep links and the hashtags, as well as the surges and usability of certain use cases in the app and time spent or edits created around these particular brands to see huge surges of millions and millions of new assets and tens of thousands of people who suddenly came out of nowhere to download the application or millions in that given month.
Great. Thank you, everyone. It's been really valuable. I'd like to open up the panel to any questions which anyone may have, which we may not have covered. So please, any questions, feel free to ask.
Sorry to be that bearer of bad news, but unfortunately we don't have time for questions right now. As I mentioned before, speakers like it when you ambush them in the hallways. Can we get a round of applause for our panel? They were wonderful.